Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Newell, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Newell, the board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, Professor Malcolm Press CBE, is a highly experienced board and governance leader in UK education and the public sector. He is Vice-Chancellor of Manchester Metropolitan University and President of Universities UK, representing more than 140 institutions on sector strategy, advocacy and policy. He currently serves as a trustee of the British Council, with previous trustee roles including UCAS, WWF UK, Kew Gardens and the National Trust, amongst others. So Malcolm, a huge welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, good to be here.
Malcolm, I'd love to start by exploring the role of a university board through the eyes of a Vice-Chancellor. Universities educate millions, drive research and innovation, enhance the UK's influence abroad and shape the next generation of leaders. But how their boards function is less often discussed. For a listener who is considering their first university board role, what should they understand about how boards actually add value from the perspective of a Vice-Chancellor?
I think the most important thing for anyone thinking about joining any board is you've got to be interested in the business of that organisation. And as you so nicely say, Ollie, universities are all about education, training, skills, research, innovation, global reach, contribution to place and community. So those are the sorts of skills that we need and the sorts of people who I think can make such a valuable contribution to a university board. The thing to add is that not every board member will be able to contribute to all of those activities. So we're always looking for people with specialist expertise who can help us in those areas, but also people that can help us with the other business of running a university. My own institution, Manchester Metropolitan University, is an organisation of some 44,000 students and 5,000 staff. So we're getting on for being the size of a small town. And we have many of the functions that a small town would have. You know, we have estates people, we have a lot of infrastructure, IT activity, student support services, catering, grounds people, so finance, HR, all those functions. So we need people who have expertise in those areas, as well as people who are interested in academic activity. So for example, we have just rolled out 2 large enterprise systems across the university. These have taken considerable time, effort and money to get right. And many listeners will know that enterprise systems often are fraught with complexity. I think the value that we often get from people with this sort of expertise is when things are not quite going to plan, so things are progressing slowly, they can often provide the sort of questions that you might need to prompt the supplier. One of our suppliers was recently sold and bought up by someone else, so we had a bit of a transition there. Often if it's a new system rather than an off-the-shelf system, there might be questions about the extent to which you can go live, how much risk you're prepared to carry. So they can bring all their experiences to bear and help you, I think, ask the right questions and be prepared for what you might need to do as you start to go live with various systems. So it's a complex area. It's not an area in which I have personal expertise, but it is an area where I know we've benefited massively from the expertise of our non-execs.
Can you unpack that a little bit more for me, that idea of how much risk are you prepared to carry as a Vice-Chancellor? What are the questions they're asking you that allows you to reach a more considered decision?
I think in rolling out an enterprise system, for example, there are only a certain number of points throughout the year where we can afford to take the risk of introducing a new system. The annual cycle in universities is very complex and very busy. If you think about it, admitting students, enrolling students, examining students, graduating students, onboarding new research projects, and so on. So there are only a certain number of points during the course of the year where you can take the risk of something running more slowly or in fact going wrong and causing real problems. So they've been very helpful in enabling us to think through the annual cycle, how much time might be needed, what types of mitigations we put in place and so on. So it's actually the expertise of having done it yourself, where we may not necessarily have done it ourselves recently, that is really valuable.
I like that. So effectively accepting that things will go wrong with this enterprise rollout. When can you afford to go for things to go wrong? And in a university, I guess you've got a very predictable calendar. So actually there are certain times when you can afford for things, not that you ever want them to go wrong, but that resonate. I mean, we have similar when we're rolling out new changes, we tend to do them at night because we know most of our members are not surfing the site between midnight and 3 a.m. UK time. And it sounds like that's the sort of insight that they give you there.
That's right. The timing is important. It's generally drawing on their experiences, what's worked in their executive worlds, what hasn't worked in their executive worlds. And often they'll also bring experience from their non-executive worlds, which is very helpful too.
So I speak with a lot of CEOs who struggle to get value out of their board. And often because it's too large, too complex, too many stakeholders. And one of the ways that they will sometimes look to get around that is either through bilateral engagement or through engaging through committees or outside the boardroom. How do you go about outside of the boardroom looking to get value outside of your board?
Yeah, I think that is the crux of the matter. So we have board committees, as every board will do, and they are much better at working in that small group context. I also draw on board members on a case-by-case basis, so we often set up small task and finish groups. We've recently entered into a joint venture with a student housing provider, and that was quite complex, quite difficult for us, not something that we do often. So drawing 3 or 4 board members into that on a task and finish group basis was really helpful. I also meet with board members in small groups once a year, typically 2 or 3, over lunch or dinner, where we can have an open-ended discussion about anything that is concerning them. So I think finding ways to engage with board members and build relationships with them, I think is really important. And I think that comes back to the whole purpose of what the board is about and what governance is about. So clearly, strategy, co-creating the strategy, setting the KPIs, holding the board to account over delivery. Those are really important things. Providing assurance to regulators or other stakeholders. Those are important things that all boards do. But on top of that, I think it's also really important that board members are positive advocates for the university. They are interested in what we do, and they are prepared to go out there into their world, stand shoulder to shoulder with us and speak to the importance of what we do. And then on top of that, support the chief executive and support the senior team in delivering. So that personal connection, if you like, is really important, because without that, it's much harder for them to know how best they can support me and my senior team in delivering for the university.
One of the things that strikes me as ironic about university boards is that universities have produced the research that shows that boards above a certain size lose their effectiveness. I think the number is around sort of 8. And once you get bigger than 8, the effectiveness of the board is, I think the research shows, falls off a cliff quite quickly. How do you reconcile those two things, that university boards themselves are then so much larger than the average board? And, is there anything as a sort of board member that can be done about that?
I think this requires an experienced chair who knows how to manage a large board. There is also research about the most effective size of a senior team. I think similarly, it comes down to the capability and experience of the chief executive or vice-chancellor to manage that team and to get the very best from them. The more that you understand the individuals around the table, the more that the individuals around the table feel as though they have an opportunity to engage with you outside of the boardroom, I think the better it is to deliver good governance. So it's not impossible to work with a large board. And I think you have to tension the reasons why we have a large board. It's important in organisations like ours that members of staff, members of the university and students are engaged. I think we would be less rich in our ability to govern the institution if we didn't have those voices present around the table. So it's where you get the value. Not all board members will speak to every topic. I think it's really important that people know when to contribute and when not to. And important they know they have a line in, a way in, if there's something that they want to add that they haven't been able to contribute during the course of the meeting. So yeah, it's not always easy, but I think it's what would it look like if we didn't have that? We'd have a very small group of people from outside of the organisation effectively governing the institution, and that'll be at the expense of listening to the student voice and the staff voice.
We talked about your experience as a VC on the board. Can we just widen the lens to the university sector as a whole? Because as president of Universities UK, you have a wonderful perspective to survey the challenges and opportunities facing UK university boards today. What, in your mind, are the top 3 issues that UK university boards need to navigate now?
Well, I think there are a small number of issues that are probably taxing many university boards across the country at the moment. First and foremost amongst these will be financial sustainability. Most universities in the UK depend on undergraduate students, domestic students from the UK, as their major income stream. And the university fee has been capped for the best part of a decade. So although we're not part of the public sector, the government can control the top line income from domestic undergraduates by fixing the fee cap. It's just gone up, and who knows, it may be linked to inflation, continue to rise, but it's been fixed for a long time now. So that's one issue. International student fee income has been important, but on top of that, international students add a huge richness to the experience of domestic students and create massive soft power for us when they go back to their home countries once they've finished studying. But you'll know that a major priority for the government is to reduce net migration. And one way to do that is to look very carefully at international student numbers coming into the country. And then finally, of course, like everybody else, universities are subject to inflation, and inflation's been running at a high level. So all these things mean that financial sustainability is a challenge for institutions. This means that we're having to try and do more and better with less, and to take out costs where we can, but without compromising quality. A second issue that will affect universities, and I'm sure will be of great interest to boards, are the issues around academic freedom and freedom of expression. Universities are a melting pot of views and opinions, and we need to work very hard to make sure that any views within the law can be expressed, but that as a result of doing so, we're not victimizing or harassing or causing undue distress to others who may have a different view. So finding a way to speak freely and openly without suppressing ideas within the law, but at the same time not causing anxiety or distress to others, is a very careful path that we have to navigate. And the way that we do this is to think about the time, the manner and the place of any expressions that are made. So we make sure that they're appropriate. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And the third point that I would add will be the rapidly changing external environment. The government is about to publish a white paper on post-16 education. We've had an immigration white paper. And so the landscape in which we operate is rapidly changing. The way in which we are regulated is evolving. So I think all these issues around regulation, policy and alignment are big factors that will concern university boards. I could have added to that list the industrial strategy. How do universities ensure that their research and their innovation is aligned to the industrial strategy, working with local employers and also local governments? So there's a lot going on. It's a very busy space and plenty for board members to consider.
I was going to say, not many tricky issues. They're all pretty easy to resolve.
Well, you're welcome to join our board anytime, Ollie, if you've got great solutions to those challenges.
Wow. I mean, I can't imagine where you begin with some of those challenges. Can we start with that first one, the sort of the financial pressures? Because my experience of working in the education space, I used to invest in the education space, is that it's a bit different from other sectors because it's harder to measure the sort of return on investment of certain things. It doesn't necessarily make itself easily calculable for sort of, classic returns on investment type calculations, and you have other factors at work. What are the most helpful discussions or frameworks that you're using or seeing being used to tackle those challenges? Because it feels right now that universities are really stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of, costs going up and capped on the income they can bring in, and actually losing income because of the pressure on international students.
So before I go on to answer that, I think it's just worth reminding listeners that universities are charities, and the money that we might generate on our activities is all reinvested. So you can look in the annual report and accounts of my own institution. We probably make about an 8% margin on all our activities, and that is all invested in its entirety into students, the student experience, research, the estate, and the opportunities that we provide for our learners. So there's no shareholder value in the sense that it might be in a private sector company. The biggest challenge for universities is, I think, the financial forward look. So we all try and work very hard to estimate what student numbers will look like in the future. But this has to be done against a challenging backdrop, a backdrop of the changing number of 18-year-olds looking to come to university, and the changing environment for international students and the opportunities that they can foresee here in the UK. So the number of 18-year-olds, visa conditions, and also competition between universities. In 2014, we changed from a system where university numbers were capped, institution by institution, to a model where universities were free to compete for students. And so over that time, there have been quite significant changes in my own institution. If we look back to 2019, we admitted about 9,600 first-year undergraduates from the UK. This year, we've taken about 3,000 more. And we've done that without dropping A-level entry grades. And so that means that whilst there will be more 18-year-olds and we may have widened participation, we'll have been able to be taken market share from some other institutions. So that financial forward look is really important, and it's quite hard to make a judgment call over a 3 to 5 year period. In addition to that, the cost base of universities can also be quite expensive and difficult to manage. It takes time to appoint staff and train staff to deliver particular programs. The needs of employers can change very rapidly. And of course, anything to do with estates takes time as well as money. So it's not easy to turn the tap on and off very quickly if something is not right and needs right sizing. And I think that combination of a financial forward look and the time taken to make adjustments means that it can be quite difficult for universities to budget. And I think a golden rule is not to commit any expenditure till you've actually got the cash in the bank. If you do anything other than that, you're on a very rocky road.
Are you seeing some leaders in this space who are innovating and unlocking the financial conundrum that you're facing there better than others? And if so, what are they doing?
I think there are a number of things that universities can do individually and collectively. So individually, for example, we have reduced the number of modules. So during a typical year, a student might take, say, 4 or 6 modules to comprise 1 year of study. 5 or 6 years ago, we had about 1,400 modules with 10 or fewer students on them. Today, we're down to single-digit numbers. So we've become much more efficient in delivery. And at the same time, interestingly, both student satisfaction and staff satisfaction have gone up. So this is a great example of how we can drive efficiency without compromising quality. Universities also work together increasingly more often to do things. In Greater Manchester, the 5 Greater Manchester universities have come together to provide mental health services for students. So we're better and we're more efficient as a consequence of doing that. My own university has a joint school of architecture with the University of Manchester next door. And again, there's great benefits that come from doing that in partnership. Across the entire sector now, Universities UK has set up something that we're calling a transformation and efficiency task force, which is looking at what more we can do. Can we do better procurement? Can we collaborate more extensively? How can we work with our local authorities and our employer partners to do things at quality, but much more efficiently and effectively? So I think there's a lot of changes taking place. Within the UK, we have a high quality, but expensive system. And that's why we're so attractive to international students. We're seen as a sector which is world leading, world class, and provides a brilliant education opportunity for international students. And that costs money. And that's why they come. And so we want to try and make sure we can be more efficient, but without compromising the quality and value of what we deliver.
A couple of points there that really stood out for me, that less is more, the power of focus, which is a lesson I keep failing to learn. But the fact that you actually reduce the offering and increase the student and staff satisfaction probably has applicability to sectors everywhere that I think boards often forget. And then the other thing there was, you talked what others I think in past episodes have called collaboration, where you are working with those who are nominally your competitors and actually able to still compete, but actually compete in a way that is more efficient for everybody. I'm curious, where do you look to? Are there other sectors or areas that you look to for inspiration on how you can innovate on this front?
I'm so pleased you asked me that, Ollie, because that gives me a chance to talk about something which is so very dear to my heart, and that is the science of ecology. And as an ecologist, I always look to the natural world to look for ways of doing things. And whilst competition is an incredibly powerful force in nature, when the environment is really tough, when things are really hard out there, organisms, plants, animals and microbes often collaborate in order to promote survivorship. And that's exactly what I see going on in the world of higher education and also in the world of business too. It only makes sense to do this when there's a something for something. Things can be achieved through partnership that will be much more difficult and challenging otherwise.
And it's in those periods of stress when you need to take a different mindset than you might during an ordinary course of operations.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
One of the hardest parts of breaking into board roles is knowing how to reposition your career story in a way that demonstrates you will add value as a non-executive. Neural Plus is the expert in your corner, helping you craft your board narrative, build the governance skills boards expect, and unlock 500 additional live board opportunities annually. Go to plus.neural.com to find out more. Now, we've talked about the financial pressures. You also highlighted the international element of it. What innovation have you seen on that front that others might learn from?
I think there is plenty of innovation in the international space. One way in which we deliver programs for international students, of course, is to welcome those students to the United Kingdom and to educate and train them in our classrooms, laboratories and studios. But there are plenty of other ways of doing it. And we have a model that we refer to as transnational education. And this can take many shapes or forms. It can run from anything like having an overseas campus, and there are many universities that have overseas campuses across the world, to delivering degrees in partnerships with overseas universities, or franchising out activity overseas to overseas institutions to deliver the programs for you. So the whole range of transnational opportunities. And I think that we can already see a bit of an uptick of interest in delivering international education through these forms of partnership. We have, for example, in my own university, partnerships with universities in China, in Egypt, in the Philippines, in Switzerland, and we're looking to develop others in countries such as Vietnam, where we can work with a trusted partner to share the teaching, to share the cost, to share the innovation, and teach international students both in country and from that region in a different way to the way that we might teach them here, but without compromising the quality of what we do.
Navigating that size of change is going to require incredible changes in behaviours, investment, and strong leadership. I'm curious to hear, in your experience as a board member of affecting strategic changes of direction in that way, what have been your lessons that those listening might benefit from?
Well, I think what's very important is to understand in detail the business plan that is being put forward. So often ideas can appear attractive. They may sound sensible because somebody else has managed to get it to work. But I think asking probing questions about the market, the opportunity, the costs, the monetization, and the timescales over which all that we delivered are absolutely vital. And certainly when I've been a non-executive on boards for other organizations, I've seen where these things can work, but equally where they also run into difficulty. The example I'm thinking about is when an organization that was seeking to expand overseas activity purchased a platform for a 7-figure sum. It was a digital platform. It subsequently turned out that the platform didn't do quite all it was expected to do. The organization felt under pressure to purchase the platform quickly. Insufficient market research with the users of that platform within the UK had been undertaken, and subsequently some resistance emerged. And ultimately, the project had to be closed down. So it took time, it took money, and it didn't get very far. So I think you could say that insufficient due diligence was undertaken in order to, I think, ascertain the benefits or otherwise of that particular project.
And in that particular example, it sounds like it was the market research into the user experience that was the real missing information that might have led the board to make a different decision.
I think that's absolutely right. I think the market research would have revealed there wasn't quite such an appetite for the product. And I think also user testing, at least in a sort of preliminary way, would have demonstrated that actually the product wouldn't have interfaced with the IT systems that the users had. This was a student recruitment tool I'm talking about. And the cross-talk just never really worked very well.
I think that's a challenge many board members face, big technology type investments. You're not a technologist by background. I'm curious to hear how you think about approaching big technology investments as a board member now, having been through that a few times. What have been the lessons and how will you approach that differently to how you might have done in the past?
Yeah, I think it's important that you have a good mix of expertise, skill sets around the board table. And I think a lesson for me will be to listen more carefully to the voices of those who really do understand technology and to ensure that I am satisfied with the responses that they are being given. Because listeners will know that around the board table, it's very difficult to get perhaps more than one bite of the cherry when it comes to asking questions. So I think making sure that the people who do know have sufficient airtime to ask the right questions, to probe, and not to rush to a conclusion. And so this is where listening as a board member is a really, I think, underrated attribute, because by listening, if I can't satisfy myself that the questions are being satisfactorily answered, then I can come in behind those board members who are raising objections or at least raising concerns and reinforce that message. But I think, listening as a person who would see themselves as being intelligent but not an expert, I think that's a really important thing to do as a board member. Something else that I also do, and it needs to be done carefully and cautiously, is if there is something on the agenda coming up, which is a big decision or an important decision, I don't have the expertise. I genuinely, I'm in two minds or have gaps in my knowledge. I will often try and fill those gaps by speaking to somebody who I know does have that knowledge, but it needs to be done carefully and cautiously because, of course, you can't reveal the confidential nature of what you're talking about. But often I will try and sound out people who I trust and get their views on matters, and that's often been very useful. It needs to be used, that knowledge needs to be used carefully, because often it won't put me in a position where I can speak about something with confidence, but at least I can understand more clearly.
That's interesting. That's a very common use case amongst the participants of our pop-up boards and our mastermind groups, where people who don't have a specific domain expertise will come and bring that as an anonymized challenge and get those around the table who do have that domain expertise, exactly as you've just outlined there. One of the things you've talked about was the deal fever that you faced in that particular situation, which is a very common theme I hear a lot of, and we've heard a lot of in past episodes of Enter the Boardroom. The other that often goes hand in hand with deal fever is a very strong and dominant CEO who's putting their hands on the table and really trying to charge through the board. Is that something you faced in the boards you've been on, and what have been your lessons from that?
Well, I think there are two avenues open. The first avenue is to speak to the CEO oneself, and I've done that. And what's always important to me as a non-exec is to have a good and a trusting relationship with the CEO so that I can talk about those sorts of things. The relationship, of course, is built on the desire to support and engage with the CEO and support the organisation. But if things do get difficult, then of course the relationship means you can discuss those difficult topics. And an alternative will be to speak to another board member who has the trust and confidence of the CEO or the authority, either in that space or through their board role, if they're maybe the senior independent director or chair of committee. Use them to speak to the chief executive and or the chair. So it's deploying the other assets that exist around the board table.
Maybe humour me on this for a second. Imagine I'm the dominant CEO who's pushing something through and that you're uncomfortable with, and the chair is not doing anything. How would you bring that up with me? I'm fascinated to know how you broach that topic. Let's assume we've got a good relationship and I trust you. What's your entry in there to start that discussion?
So if we're doing it around the board table, I would ask the questions very nicely and very openly. And if you give me a response that I didn't agree with, I think I'll be very clear about the fact that I either didn't understand or felt that more information was required so that other board members could hear my concerns. And often, there'll be, in those situations, there will often be other people around the board table who feel the same as you do, but not able to articulate their opinion. So I think in a very balanced and measured way, being clear about what it is I didn't understand. If it were a one-to-one, then I think it'd be much easier to actually go through matters in some detail and perhaps ask them some supporting information. Often, the way around these things is not to drive to a conclusion in the moment. It's often better to take time to pause, to reflect, to get more information and to bring something back, either at the next board meeting or online in between board meetings. So I think, ultimately, if I have serious concerns and feel as though there's a big risk, I will go for a delaying tactic or a diversionary tactic rather than just acquiescing to whatever's being proposed.
That resonates a lot. I've certainly seen boards implode where someone has looked to achieve resolution in the boardroom rather than simply, as you say, saying, do we need to decide this right now? And if not, can we have a further discussion on this and revisit it at the next meeting? And you then don't back the CEO into a corner where suddenly their ego and pride is at stake. Now, I know you have been asked to sit on the appointment panels for at least 2 CEO and 2 chair appointments, which is often a signal that the others on the board recognise that you have skill in that area. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on what surprised you most about those chair processes that a board member listening who's not been through one will not know.
So the point I'm going to make would also apply to appointing board members. I think there's an overemphasis on appointing people with the right set of skills, and perhaps an under-recognition of the importance of the right sets of behaviours. And it's that combination of skill set and behaviour that I think make for an excellent board member, whether as a regular member or as chair. And the behaviours bit, when it comes to appointing a chair, speaks to the importance of the chair having an effective working relationship with the chief executive. So those are the things I will point to.
So what are your tricks for getting underneath the behaviours? Imagine I'm a potential chair candidate. What are you looking for in our discussion
I think it's trying to sort of pull out the emotional intelligence that comes from the ways in which the questions are answered. You can often tell a lot from the way people convey information, the body language, but also the sorts of people that we're talking about will be well known amongst the community of people that take on NED roles and work in what are often quite small and closed sectors. So it's not too difficult to find out a little bit about some of these people without having to say very much at all, and certainly without revealing why you're interested. So I always do my homework on people.
Malcolm, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
The dreaded lightning round.
Everybody's favourite moment. Boardroom behaviour that irritates you most.
For me, it's people who have single issues that they always revert to. So when the hand goes up, you know what they're going to say before they've even started, because it's always the same thing. And I think it's really important that you don't always come back on the same type of point, irrespective of the matter being discussed. I find that really annoying.
Most valuable board ritual.
Spending time with execs and non-execs. It's indispensable.
Favourite quote.
Leadership is nature, nurture and luck.
Most significant professional insight.
So I think there is a lot of talk about strategy and not enough focus on delivery. And I'm always more interested in how is the strategy going to be put into practice than the strategy itself. Because a lot of time is spent on tweaking the strategy and it's assumed that it will just be delivered. Whereas focus really does need to be placed on the delivery.
1% ideation, 99% perspiration.
That was a much better response than mine, Ollie. So,
worst professional advice you've ever received?
Well, when I started out as an academic, I was told to sit back for a few years and think about what I really wanted to do. Head of the department said to me, if you do that, you won't be here in a few years' time. So the worst advice is to take your time excessively. And I'm always a great person of just getting on with it. Why can't we just get on with it?
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
So what I've learned is that sometimes people say things where if you interpret what they say precisely, you get the wrong end of the stick. So I'm always keen to try and listen to what I think people mean rather than what they say, which can be misinterpreted. So the context is important. Their way of vocalizing ideas is important. So I've learned to do that. I used to listen to people in a very literal sense, and now I try and interpret what they're trying to say.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
Well, I think in my early days as a board member, if I didn't understand something, I went with the flow. Whereas I've learnt to test and challenge, gently, but purposefully.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
Well, since I don't spend a lot of time reading leadership manuals, the answer to that question links back to the first one, which is I've been drawing on the experiences of others. I'm a great people watcher. I've learnt loads from working with brilliant execs and non-execs over the years, and I continue to do so today.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
3 things. So first, if you're not interested in the business of the board, don't bother. You've got to get that fire in your belly about what the organisation is there to do. You've got to be supportive of the CEO, want to work with them, and to do your utmost to make them successful, not constantly provoke. And thirdly, enjoy the journey. It's a great opportunity and a privilege to be on a board. If you don't enjoy doing it, then find something else that you do enjoy.
Malcolm, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
My pleasure, Ollie. Thank you.
If you want to accelerate your board career and become a more attractive board candidate, Neural Plus gives you expert support, tailored guidance, and a much wider pool of live board roles. Listeners get a 10% discount. Head to plus.neural.com and apply the code ENTER at checkout.